So first of all, I wanted to go for a bit of a preamble in terms of like how we got to this particular presentation, because I think it's a really interesting story. So as James has said, I'm from a comms planning background, a multi-channel comms planning background, and I got into mobile because it's the most exciting space that there is at the moment in advertising for me. So there was some real hot debate about what we would talk about today, and I think integration of mobile is really the next step of how we use this particular channel. So very simply, we've called it the mobile hub because we believe that the mobile phone and the tablet is the centre of pretty much every consumer's life, but advertisers still act as if it's a secondary channel. So hopefully what this will do is, or this presentation, what I'd love you to take from this is that, wow, we really need to be thinking about mobile first in pretty much whatever we do. And also to go away with some actual things that you can apply to your own day jobs. Because one of the things that I found when writing this presentation is there's just not a lot of content about integrated. You know, you'll see people standing up and talking about how it should be integrated, but there's very little detail on how it actually works. So what I've tried to do here is really give you some principles that you can apply to everything. So it will be a little bit generic in places, and obviously if you want to discuss anything more, you know, we're very happy to help with your business. Right, a little bit about mobile disruption. Now, disruption is quite a trendy word, actually. You see it quite a lot mentioned in terms of business, but I think it definitely applies to mobile. Mobile has really disrupted so many business models, and I think if you look at some of the big brands that were around 20 years ago and how mobile's affected them, so you can think of anything from music to banking, entertainment, really anything, mobile has had some kind of disruption or given some disruption to that business model. So I wanted to talk very quickly about why that is. So first of all, you've probably seen this Mary Meeker slide before. Apologies if you have, but I think this is sometimes taken out of context. I think really what it's saying is that each cycle of computing has a bigger and bigger effect. So if you're looking at mainframes in the 1960s versus what's happening now, it's so much more disruptive in terms of what's happening. And of course, there will be more phases of this. Each wave is more and more disruptive, which I think is really interesting. And it's also happening at a faster pace. Now, so the iPhone is 6 years old, which is just astonishing. You think of how it's really changed the way that people think about phones and the way people think about media, mobile media in particular. Facebook, 9 years old. These cycles are happening quicker and quicker, and there's a lot of evidence to say that actually development of smartphone products is getting quicker as well. So it's an unstoppable force. And mobile is taking on religious proportions. I don't know if anyone's actually saw this particular picture, which was featured in the Metro, and it was available on through other sources. But this is actually the inauguration of Pope Francis. Now, of course, this is a very holy moment. People there, you know, are going to be likely to be very, very religious, and actually they're viewing the inauguration of their new Pope through their mobile phone, which I think is incredible. And of course, if you looked back at previous crowd addresses by popes, you would see the same thing happening as well. So it's not just enough that you're there, you have to film it and share it. And of course, the mobile device is really, really important in all of that. And I think this is one thing that isn't really talked about much. It really defines the way that we communicate as well. So here's 4 different types of technology which actually relate to really the way that we interact with each other. But it's also, there's many brands that actually base themselves on it. So I don't know if anyone remembers the old Nokia. That was my first phone. Of course, that was very successful because SMS was really, really easy to use on that. BlackBerry really popularised mobile email, and Apple really popularised the app. And of course, there's going to be other technologies. I would suggest the augmented reality in the form of people like Google's Glass or any other kind of wearable computing will come in that way. But what I'm trying to say here is that the mobile device basically defines a lot of the channels which we can use, which again is disrupting the way that we communicate. And it's also overtaken our media attention. So, I mean, this really surprised me when I read it the other day, but smartphones and tablets now account for 35% of all online traffic. That is only going upwards as PC sales decline. It also takes up 38% of our own media interactions throughout the day. And one of the great phrases that I saw in a presentation the other day was time to screen. So I can imagine if you think of how long it takes for you to actually view your mobile device after you wake up, it's pretty quick. For most people it's a matter of seconds, and there's lots of great studies about how people check Facebook the first thing in the morning using their mobile device. So it really has our undivided attention. But it's not actually all about mobile, incidentally. So 60% of use of mobile phones is within the home. So actually it's disturbing the media attention of other devices in the home, for instance the TV, which I think is really interesting. Again, shows how it disturbs the way that we interact with media. Audience use of technology is in front of user innovation. Google said recently that they think that each consumer with a mobile phone or a device is roughly 24 months ahead in terms of their behaviours in front of a marketer. So a marketer's 2 years behind what an audience is doing with their mobile phone, which is really interesting. I think it's open for debate. I haven't seen any particular evidence to back that up, but there is definitely a gap between audience attention and advertiser innovation. And this particular graph shows the amount of ad spend per channel comparative to the amount of time spent with each media. And as you can see, mobile time spent is only really behind TV in this particular instance, but the ad spend is so much smaller. And that gap is slowly starting to close, but it's not closing at a super rate, which means that it's going to overtake that anytime soon. So there's still so much more. There's so much more to run in terms of advertising on the mobile phone. And I think what you need to ask is, well, why? Why is this phone, the tablet? Why is it so useful, and why is it so engrossing in terms of our time? Well, it does three things really. It's a utility device, it's an entertainment device, and it also provides us with information. And I think if we're going back to the how mobile disrupts a particular industries, we can relate that to each of these. So, for instance, games, music, and film totally been disrupted by mobile. If you look at news, in terms of the way that we consume news, I don't know about you personally, but I'm on The Guardian every morning, and I go onto the train or viewing it on my tablet. That's totally overrided my use of newspapers at that point. And then I suppose really the last few points really in terms of how mobile is disrupting what's going on is really around how an individual treats their particular mobile device and how an advertiser treats it. So, I don't know, does anyone recognise this particular picture? No? Didn't think so. It's a tweet that someone, of a picture that somebody took at a Cyprus bank when there was nearly the runs on the bank. So this is a queue of people basically taking out their cash. Now what's really interesting about this is that kind of reporting was really, really difficult before a mobile device, to actually be able to take something and report on it instantly. So for a user, it's actually their primary reporting tool. They use their phone in a way that's primary to pretty much whatever they do. If you then look at, say, a lot of the media strategies that I've come across in terms of targeting, mobile is seen as really as a secondary a secondary target in terms of your advertising. It's seen as an add-on, but that is clearly against the way that actual users are using their phones. So that should change, and that's what this presentation is about. But really, I think the technology and the way that we use mobile is mature enough that there is really no excuse to not think integrated. And I'll go into some of those challenges that have traditionally been there. In fact, first of all, the mobile phone tablets already have the attributes for greatness. So in particular, the mobile phone relates to a person. It's not a household or demographic anymore. You don't buy housewives. You can buy an individual housewife if you want, in a way that you could kind of do with online, but they tend to be shared devices. I think that's really important. It's always on. I don't personally turn my phone off, and it's usually within about 2 yards of where I'm sitting. It leaves a digital fingerprint, which we'll talk about later on, and it's the perfect interactive device, which is great for activation off of any particular media. Now, in the past, I think this was true a few years ago when I first started looking at mobile media. There were lots of challenges around integrated planning. So for instance, when you were looking at planning, there were many variables. There was actually quite a lot of fragmentation in terms of the people that you had to deal with. And that went right the way through to creative and tracking as well. So tracking was difficult. The creative specs varied between different properties. In fact, a lot of the trading that I used to do a good few years ago, the creative was actually designed by the media owner because they knew their own property the best. Data was really hard to capture and analyse because it was felt that you couldn't find these niche audiences if you had a niche product. And you couldn't get enough to actually say whether it was successful or not. And then lastly, and this is probably going to be something that we'll talk about in a future masterclass, is really around branding. It was deemed that branding had like a low impact, and it wasn't very significant in terms of the purchase funnel. And now none of that is true. That's what I would say. So first of all, planning is, there's still some challenges around it, but there are different technologies like DSPs and like various other different technologies that we can use, which make the buying and the planning of that particular media a lot easier. In terms of tracking, it is challenging, but there are solutions to it. So even if Apple recently I suppose they mothballed UDID. There is other technologies that come in to replace that. So tracking is not as much a problem as it was. Creative, there's now much more of an agreement in terms of what an ad spec is, and also the operating systems that are being used are tending now to actually move towards a few rather than many. So it actually becomes a lot simpler there as well. In terms of data, testing works. We do test campaigns for clients. We test new ideas. It works. You can capture the data. You can pull insights for it very simply. And yeah, there's really no excuse not to test on mobile anymore. And lastly, branding. So as I say, this is quite a deep subject, but it generally performs better than online in terms of the brand metrics. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because it's much more impactful on the phone. And if it's done right, the impact of it is so much better. And of course, now that we're getting towards 4G and ubiquitous Wi-Fi, we're really looking at the ability to deliver really content-rich experiences in a way that we were unable to do on 3G, I think. So basically there's no excuse not to think that mobile can't be integrated into a plan. And it might be the only way of reaching them. So a lot of work that we do is in places like South Africa, where actually people's experience of the internet for the first time is through a mobile phone. People haven't accessed the internet through any other device. This is known as leapfrogging, so they've just completely leapfrogged the PC age and they've gone into the mobile web age. But it also applies to much more developed economies as well. So, for instance, in America, it's predicted that in 2015, mobile device web traffic will actually overtake fixed line, and that will only happen in all of the developed nations as well. So we're very much going towards a mobile internet. There is an amazing study, and I'd recommend everyone to read this. It's called The Screens. It was done by Microsoft, and it talks about the personalities of different screens. And actually, when you read it, you think, hey, I think it really resonates with people when you talk about devices actually as human beings and what particular attributes they have. So I'm going to talk about the Lover, which is a mobile phone, and the Wizard, which is the tablet. And I'm going to talk about it in relation to the purchase funnel. So there are lots of different variations of this. This is my particular preference in terms of what a purchase funnel looks like. So very simply, at the top you have a larger audience which you speak to. You convert a percentage of those at every stage. And then at the bottom, if you've got them to purchase and you're clever enough to remarket to them, it's then about actually servicing those particular people and keeping them close to you and looking after their every needs. Now, very simply, that in terms of advertising, it relates to, I think, 4 distinct sections. So you have a broadcast section, which is basically casting your net. There's an engagement education section, which is about convincing people to go through to a purchase. And then there's acquisition strategies as well. Now, of course, once you've got their interest and they've got their purchase, it's then about re-engagement. And I think that that broadly relates to, and I know this is open to debate, it broadly relates to the size of the screen and also the way that you target it. So you could say that TV and cinema is probably the most famous in terms of broadcast medium, but obviously radio is in there as well. And actually you get more and more targeted as you get down to the bottom. Now, traditionally, this is where mobile, I think people have been thinking about mobile in the right way, which is to think of it as a really great acquisition tool. Because it does acquisition really well. It's a small screen, it's very targeted, and it's also relatively efficient in terms of the way that you're acquiring people. However, the mobile phone sits through all of these stages, and this is the thing. And I think when I talk about the year of integrated mobile or whatever, this is what we should be thinking about, because there is tons of research to say that mobile plus all of these equals something bigger than the sum of its parts. So yes, absolutely, acquisition, fantastic, and it's great for that, but there are other things that you can do as well that make acquisition a lot easier. So, so onto the smartphone, in terms of how that's used. So from the Microsoft Screens study, essentially the mobile phone embodies who you are. If you think about it, there's almost no surprise that the mobile phone will end up being wearable computing, because it's just basically getting as close to you as possible. I think that just totally makes sense. You want your mobile phone to know everything about you. You don't want to share it. I don't know if anyone's suffered phone anxiety when someone borrows their phone. You're not nuts. It's totally fine. It's all about the relationship that you have with this particular phone. And very simply, it's completely disrupting. I'm going to use disrupting again, but it's completely disrupting the purchase funnel. So 79% of consumers use a smartphone to help them shop, while 70% use a phone in store. Now, this is a massive problem for retail. If you imagine, I don't know if anyone saw a particular ad recently, or in fact it was a couple of years ago. It was a Dixon's ad which basically encouraged you to go into Selfridges or John Lewis, look at a TV and then go and buy it from Dixon's. Well, the thing is, for someone like Dixon's, actually one of the potential problems that they have, or one of the challenges, is that someone could go into their store and actually compare them online. So this whole idea of comparison is really challenging, and there are some interesting ways around that. But how do you make the in-store experience interesting that people actually purchase it there and then? And that's quite a challenge. I think one of the other ones, other stats to highlight in that is that almost half of all smartphone users have purchased via their device in the last 12 months. It's just such a great purchase device. Okay. So the tablet in this particular study is defined as the wizard. So basically it can entertain you, it's the sage, so it knows everything. And it's a fascinating device. And I think, and according to Adobe in a recent study, they were saying that that tablet devices have actually overtaken smartphones in terms of global web traffic. So actually in 3 years, they've done more than what the iPhone did in 6 years. So again, we're talking about this speeding up of technology and its impact. And the wizard, the tablet, is also disrupting the purchase funnel. So I think probably from the graph, unfortunately, the e-marketer graphs are quite dense, so I'm sorry about that. But if you notice here with the blue line, the percent of retail e-commerce which the tablet is taking up is increasing over time. So it's actually replacing other devices in terms of the way that people purchase. But it's very much used in a catalogue fashion, in a way that you can browse, much like you would have done a catalogue in the past, and then to purchase straight away from the device. And that tends to be how it's being used. So the first of all is the first conversation. Now, it might be that mobile is actually the best channel. It should be your lead channel. Now, this isn't for the faint-hearted, and it's not always right for every business. But it's definitely worth thinking about it like that and thinking brave. So really, the first conversation you have should be a good one. Now, there's great studies that talk about how if your mobile experience is not good, then actually you'll more than likely go to another brand. Now, that's the number one fact that is used to sell mobile sites, but there's tons of evidence to say that mobile sites are totally worth the investment for that. Now, the way you should think about this in terms of, okay, if mobile is the lead channel, well, what is the function? And there's 8 functions, 8 ways that you can speak. So at the top 4 are broadly helpful, and the bottom 4 are broadly quite difficult and actually quite challenging, but you can use those, which I'll show in the example later on. But generally, you want to be either a companion, a hero, a mediator, or a servant in terms of the way that you're speaking to those individuals. But you can play on this other stuff, and I'd definitely recommend that you go away and have a play with these in terms of what you're doing. This also fits really nicely into game theory if you're interested in applying game theory to some of your marketing. So in practice, well, you should really pick your function wisely in terms of what you're doing, and I think it's quite disciplined to say, what are we doing at that point in that particular conversation that we're having, and to borrow a quote from a Google executive. He said that the best ads are indistinguishable from information, which I think is very true. You want an ad to be doing the right thing for what that person's looking for at that time, and mobile can totally do that. It can do that really well. And also be really hyper-relevant where possible, so be very targeted, reference the time, reference the weather. All of that will help you build a more engaging conversation. 2, so extend awareness. Now, this is by far the easiest thing that you can do with mobile in terms of doing some more integrated work. So I don't know how many of you are multi-channel planners or have a responsibility for TV budgets, but this is just such a simple, quick win. I don't know, you just have no excuse not to even investigate this. So a bit of science, I do apologise, but any of you who have seen a TV coverage curve will know that the more you spend doesn't necessarily mean that you're always going to get the same amount back, and there's a limit of what you can do, and there's a sweet spot of the more you spend, the more you get back. So every channel has its limits, even mobile, in terms of reaching saturation of your spend. But there's one way of getting around this, which is to really diversify in terms of your channels. Now, mobile video is something that is really simple to do in terms of mobile advertising. You know, to actually repurpose a TV ad for mobile is quite simple to do, but it's amazing how many people don't use the mobile channel to extend their TV ads. Now, this particular study, which I've referenced in here, is from Columbia Business School, and what they essentially say is that it works. You know, you can actually use this to trigger reminders, much like you would a radio to extend a TV campaign. It works exactly the same. But what's quite interesting is that if your brand isn't particularly sexy, if it's very utilitarian, it still works, and in fact it works more effectively, which is incredible as well. So really, these ads can just remind people. They don't have to even be the full TV ad. So very simple. You can increase your coverage and also extend awareness of a TV campaign. So in terms of in practice, I think it's worth investigating optimal television weights plus mobile, which is quite a challenge, I appreciate, but there's definitely ways that you can test taking a small amount of money from TV and investing that into mobile video, and you know, it does work. What you should be looking at is flighting any mobile video when the television is bedded in, which essentially means that there is some kind of awareness. You can build awareness just using mobile video, but if you imagine you're going from the big screen at the top of the channel through to the smaller screen at the bottom, it makes much more sense to have that working in a succinct line in that way. And use alternative copy. So the great thing about mobile is that you can put the alternative stuff on there, you can put the outtakes, you can put the interesting stuff that you probably wouldn't share on TV, which is great. And then the last part is to work within 15 seconds in length as a rule of thumb. Although, and this is, I haven't quite got an opinion on this yet, but I think from what I've read, 40% of video watched on a mobile phone is over 10 minutes long. So potentially there's an argument for you doing some longer form copy if you wish as well. Now, thirdly, there's tons of stuff around this, but I'll move through this particularly quickly because mobile has been used for some deeper engagement in the past. You will have seen apps and various other things, but there's some more interesting stuff as well that you can do. So really the key point to make here, I think, is that there are very few one-screen experiences. And one of the things that we were debating over the last couple of days were, okay, what are the one-screen experiences that you have? Well, it's mostly with your mobile phone. So actually the dual-screen experiences are mobile plus other media, and then the single-screen experiences you have are generally your mobile phone. So, okay, how do you actually take advantage of that? Well, you can add layers to other areas that you're doing. So, but it depends on the device that you're using. So, and I think people from experience will understand this as well, is that a smartphone is generally used in the way that a hunter would. So you're trying to find information really quickly, trying to make a purchase really quickly, trying to find a restaurant really quickly. Whereas the tablet is used very much in a gatherer's way. So you're trying to find the best things, you're curating what you've got. And you know, just to back that up, of Pinterest users, the best Pinterest users, the most followed, 58% of them prefer to use a tablet. So that's purely because it's a curating device, which is really interesting. So how do you take advantage of that? Well, I think you should ask, okay, what can you do to increase engagement from the big screen? And when I say the big screen, that could be any type of media that's really bigger than a smartphone. Does mobile activity add a missing component to what you're trying to solve? Are you entertaining or providing more information, or even both? and what devices are applicable, because clearly if it's really tactical and you want to get people to do something really quickly, maybe a tablet isn't the most important device. Maybe it is just about getting to the small screens really quickly. Okay, so this is one that I think people have been doing for quite a while, but I don't think it's been particularly rationalised, and I'm going to put forward a fresh argument in terms of the way that you can use mobile as an activation mechanism, which allows you to actually test and measure other types of media. So the first thing to note is that actually customers want to share data with you, they want to interact with you. So here's an example of what people are willing to do, or who they're willing to share their information with. And if you notice that 20% of people are willing to share with someone who they have no relationship with, but are potentially within the same group of interests of what they do, that's pretty high. It's 1 in 5 people. However, there is a caveat. They will do that, but they want something in return. So generally, it's free stuff, okay, that people want in order to give their information. But that's great, because I think a lot of brands are able to give some of these things, and they do that naturally. So why not use that in a testing cycle? So the great thing about mobile is you can have quite small budgets in terms of testing and to actually test the hypotheses, and then you can keep reiterating in terms of the way that a programmer would actually go through a development stage. This is called agile development, which is basically rapid prototyping. You can do the same with mobile media. You can also do that to test other types of media. So you'll have seen QR codes and short codes on particularly outdoor. But this is a great way of measuring how engaging something is, and then actually rolling that back into your planning. And I've not really heard people talk about mobile in that way, but it's a great way of actually informing your multi-channel planning going forwards. So in practice, so use mobile as a response mechanism on all media if you can, maybe even online. I know it's probably, there has been talk about, okay, why would you have a mobile response on an online banner or something along those lines? There may be a reason. Honestly, don't discount it. There's lots of different ways that you can measure stuff. Most importantly, give customers a reason to interact with you, because the more that they interact with you, the more that you'll be able to test and actually inform what you do going forwards. And then thirdly, test with small budgets and then improve, and you can actually increase those budgets as well. And lastly, I've mentioned here before that mobile is great for conversion. And it's really easy to see why. I think if you think about the conversion funnel, you can go through the conversion funnel really, really quickly. So if you're on the street and you're looking for a cafe, you would research the cafe. So immediately that's about awareness. You'd then go through the reviews, which is your consideration, and then you'd go there and buy it. And within 15 minutes, your mobile phone has taken you all the way through. And it's and it's quite simple, because your phone is a catalogue of items and services. It gives you an opinion on what to buy, and it's potentially a purchase mechanism as well. So it has everything to take you all the way through, which I think is quite interesting. So in practice, how do you take advantage of that in terms of conversion? Well, in terms of purchasing, it's really about making purchasing easy. And there's some great stats about how a mobile optimized site can help in terms of conversion in e-commerce. But here's an interesting stat that I found. So Etsy, the arts and crafts site, it has a mobile split of 75% desktop and 25% mobile in terms of traffic, but 80% of the purchases come from a desktop. Now, the implications of that are that actually people are using Etsy to browse, but then they're going to another channel to purchase. And I don't think that's unusual. So for instance, I think very few people would fill out a mortgage form on their mobile phone. They'd probably use a laptop. And that, there's there's challenges around UI in terms of how you do that, but there are certain things that you can overcome in terms of helping the conversion. And then, really, I think this is really important. Think beyond the first click, or the mobile conversion as well. So we do a lot of data analytics around, if someone's seen 3 banners, which one's the most important, for instance, which is the one that actually tipped people over to actually purchase. And what you'll often find is that there's a bigger story than just where the banner was placed in terms of conversion. And again, there's some great science around that. Okay, so in summary, and I appreciate there's quite a lot of information in there, so we will be sharing the presentation as well as the video. But I think in summary, the thing that we really wanted to get across was that mobile is the centre of pretty much everyone's lives. So why isn't the multi-channel plan built around that? And as I say, I think we are going to see that shifting in the next 24 months. And really just 2 things to ask, because I appreciate they were quite generic, and they will be applicable to parts of your business, but not to all things. But what function does mobile play in the purchase funnel of your particular consumers? And really, how can you integrate at each stage? I think if you ask that, you will come up with the right answers for your business in terms of how to use mobile. And that's it. So,